Talking about. All right, let's start again. Hi, my name's Laura Neuman. I'm delighted to have all of you here today, and we're going to talk about something that I care deeply about. Let me first sort of set it up for you and share how I came to discussing this subject. You know, I didn't plan to be an entrepreneur. It wasn't my intention when I was growing up. It was born really out of a need to create opportunity for myself. And I just believed that if I bet on myself, I would be successful. But the truth is, I didn't really know how to do it. So when I went down this path of being a tech entrepreneur, I had to figure it out. And one of the things I had to figure out was how to do a pitch deck. So my first opportunity it was over 20 years ago, and I wanted to raise money I'd worked for a tech firm, and I saw that a lot of people got stock options. I worked really hard for that firm and done great work and helped them do an IPO. I was on their S1. Every deal on their S1 when they filed for an IPO was a deal that I closed or someone on my team. And they had this big exit, and I didn't get any of the stock. So I wasn't too happy about that. And I thought, okay, well, if these guys can do it, I can do it too. So a friend of mine and I, we worked together at that previous company. We decided to launch our own company. We would become entrepreneurs. And the truth is, we didn't know how to do that. We didn't know anything about it. It was a new experience for us. And the first thing we realized, other than coming up with an idea, was that we needed to learn how to raise money. So what I did was I went online and I looked for a presentation or a seminar on how to raise venture capital, much like you're doing today. So, just know that I came at it from the very same place that you are. I went to that presentation, and I found out there were two kinds of investors. There were angel investors and there are venture investors. And that was sort of my first learning experience. So I asked if I could go in and meet with each of them, and I did. And the first thing they said to me was, "Where's your business plan?" And I realized I needed a pitch. So that's how it started for me. And I wanted to share some of my experiences along the way. And I'm happy to answer questions about that journey at the end of the slide deck. So first, let's see, my slides aren't, there we go. First is there are two kinds of investors. There are angel investors and there are venture investors. There's also private equity. We're not going to talk so much about that today, but I do want to talk about the difference between angel and VC. Angel investors usually come in an earlier stage. Now, the first time I approached an angel investor, I went into his office and I sat down and I had no idea what to expect. And what I found was someone really friendly, someone who is excited about working with entrepreneurs, someone who had the financial resources to make an investment in a company. But they also, I found, wanted to be pretty involved. So if they were making an investment as an angel investor, they were probably going to invest less money than a venture investor would, but they would have a very active role. They tend to be informed in the areas where they invest, and they're looking for, I think, generally an opportunity to become like a mentor advisor. They want to be active with the company, and often it starts in an advisory role and turns into an angel investment. The second key area, and this is where most of the attention goes, is venture capital. Now, I have watched venture capitalists evolve over the last 2 decades, and there's a lot of information out there about them. I personally like venture money. I think if you can bootstrap your business, that would be my first choice, no question about it. I want to keep as much of it as I can. But if I needed an investor, I wouldn't shy away from venture capital. In fact, I would go into the relationship thinking this is a partnership. If they've made the decision to invest money in my company, it means they believe in that company. They tend to be very professional. They tend to be informed. They also, they tend to have a lower risk tolerance than angel investors. So typically with a venture capitalist, they've raised a fund. So they've gone out to their investors. They've raised a pile of money. They put it in a fund and they have to put that money to work. So they're looking for companies like yours to make an investment, and they have somewhere between a 5 and 10-year horizon to close that fund. So if you have a business that from concept to exit is somewhere in the 5 to 10-year time frame, that's a good investment for them if it has a lot of potential upside. They are looking for a high return for their investment. So if you don't have, sort of that hockey stick potential in your company, then it's probably not going to be the right fit for them. They also tend to specialize. So if you talk to a venture capitalist in this area, and I talk to them regularly, they all have areas that they like to invest. It might be cyber, it might be healthcare, ed tech. They typically have areas of focus or expertise. And I think that's important as you're considering your list of people to approach. You really want to make sure that your idea aligns with their area of expertise. And at the end of the day, they want to be a business partner to you. They will have an active role in how you run your company. And they will expect to be not only board members, but also with their preferred stock position will, make a lot of decisions about the direction of the company, specifically about future funding. So are you ready for venture investment? We're going to lump together angel and venture for now. There are a couple things you have to get comfortable with, and not everyone is, and not every deal is a venture deal. The first is giving up a lot of ownership and control. I mentioned preferred stock in the previous slide. The truth is that when an institutional investor, in particular, a venture capital investor, comes into your company, they are going to get preferred stock. So even if they only have a small percentage of the company, 5%, 10%, 20%, they're still going to have preferred rights. So at the end of the day, they will have a lot of say about the direction of the company. And you have to be really comfortable with that. They have to be a partner with you. So when you go into the conversation with them, you need to think of it as a partnership. Now, a lot of founders are uncomfortable with the approach of the venture capitalists because they're really in it for making money. The truth is, I don't think that's a bad thing. If they're in it for making money and you know that going into the conversation, it frames the potential partnership. So one thing that's great about it is that they're really clear about what they want to get out of it. And I think it's helpful to have such transparency in the process. So I personally, don't take that as a turnoff. It's really about whether or not you have the right partner at the table and you can accept them having a considerable amount of say about the direction of the company. At the end of the day, they're looking for an exit. So I always say to entrepreneurs, your goal is to build a great company. And I stand by that. That is your number one goal. But the truth is, second to that, of course, is figuring out if there's an exit in the future. And that exit could be being acquired by another company, or it could be an IPO. For a venture investor, they need to see that on the horizon in order for that to make sense for them. So they will be going into the conversation with you thinking about that. They're also looking for a big return. So if you want to invest in the stock market, your money's going to double every 7 to 10 years. Venture investors are looking for a multiple X return on any investment. So what's the purpose of the pitch? Once you've gotten the meeting and you're going to meet with, you could actually be meeting directly with a venture capital firm, or you could be in a business plan competition. They are two different experiences, but there's a lot of similarity. A business plan competition is a specific, very clearly prescribed amount of time to deliver your pitch. It could be 7 minutes, 8 minutes, or 10 minutes. It's rarely more than 10 or 12 minutes. So, it's helpful to go on the shorter side for a business plan competition, but it's a shorter time frame, so you have to get to the point a lot faster. In a private meeting, you're probably going to have a little more time, but the truth is you still have the same goal in either presentation, and that is to get their attention immediately. If you haven't generated attention in your deal within the first 2 or 3 slides, you've lost them. I promise you they'll be picking up their phone and checking their email or their texts. So your goal there is really for them to get excited about your idea and to want to know more. This is not the time to explain in detail how your technology works. This is the time to grab their attention. You're in sales mode. There are a couple things that they want to see. One is, what do you do and how do you do it? And you have to find that balance between sharing that and also not providing too much detail. Now, there is a tendency I have found with a lot of entrepreneurs to create more slides than necessary because they want to be more detailed about sharing the story. I call those the due diligence slides. So create as many slides as you want, go through the story in absolute detail, and then go back and change it to about 12 slides. And those extra slides that have more detail become your due diligence slides. Because if you're fortunate enough to get a second meeting, you're going to want that more granular detail for that follow-up conversation. Still valuable. Never get rid of slides. Always just either hide the extras or put them in the back. I've never seen a time where you didn't want those slides. It's somewhere along the way. So what are the keys to a good pitch deck? There are a lot of opinions about this, but I'm just going to share some of my experience. First and foremost, you must tell a story. If you're not telling a great story, no matter what your idea is or who you are, it's not gonna land well. So you have to approach this like a story. And I often say to entrepreneurs, and many of them are technical because I focus on technology, I often say, look, you're in a play. Assume you're in a play and everybody has a role. The CEO needs to kick it off. The founder or CEO needs to, be the starting point and be the one who delivers it. Sometimes you're going to have someone else speak, depending on whether it's a business plan competition or a venture capital meeting. If you have other people participating in the delivery of your deck, everyone needs to know when they speak, what they're going to say, and when they move in and out of the presentation. So again, it's telling a story and it's doing it as if you're on stage. So it's important to be very organized with your thoughts. If you don't have a clear storyboard, which is really the first thing I would do, I would lay out my slide deck on a storyboard and organize it so that you deliver it in a way that's telling the story the way you want them to hear it. That's how you sell your idea, in a thoughtful, prepared, organized way. I shared already a couple dozen slides is a great starting point. Maybe even start with 10 and then have room for 1 or 2 extras if you need them. Now, I recently was coaching someone who was preparing for a business plan competition, and the presentation was going up against the time limit. And so it forced me to think differently about the delivery of the slides. There's this tendency to write all the notes in the notes section of your slide. And the truth is that that's really helpful, but you have to be able to deliver your slide deck without looking at the notes if you really want to be effective. And so I went through and I did some calculations and I realized that, if your time frame is 10 minutes, you have about a minute per slide. The number of words that you can comfortably deliver in a minute is 125. So in the notes section of your slides, when you're thinking about what you want to say for each slide, you need to limit that to about 125 words. Now, if you go to 150, I've seen 250, you need to balance that somewhere else in the deck. There has to be a place somewhere else in the deck where there are fewer words because you have a time constraint. One thing I mentioned, when you're delivering it, I think it's really important to talk about the delivery of the deck. Couple reasons. One is that we spend so much time making sure that it's a good deck and we have the right graphics and the right color scheme. But the truth is that the delivery is just as important, if not more important. So if you're nervous, because we all get nervous, right? It's just a natural part of the human condition. Go through your notes and add pauses. Put in a ... Put in space, write pause where you want to pause, and take out as many words as you can. The more impactful you can be, the more impactful with the fewest amount of words is your goal. So on the slide itself, you want to have some white space so it's not overwhelming, and that the graphics are something and the content is something that the audience can receive. You want to keep their attention, and if they look at your slide and it feels like it's overwhelming, they're probably going to look away. So you want to make sure you have the right balance with white space on the actual slide, but don't forget the importance of the actual delivery too. It's really important to know where those pauses should occur, and it's helpful to create notes for yourself. So what a pitch is not. It is not a detailed presentation, but like I said, don't lose those slides. I promise you, you're going to create more detailed slides than you will need for your pitch deck. They are very valuable. Keep that content because you'll want it for future due diligence conversations. There is a tendency with technical founders in particular to spend a lot of time breaking down the technology. The truth is a pitch deck doesn't need that. A pitch deck is about getting their attention. It's not about giving the finer points of how your idea works. That comes in the next presentation. And ultimately, it's about getting their attention, right? You're not going to close them in this deal. You're never going to close them on your first pitch. If you're fortunate and you're doing well, you're going to get another meeting. So I have spent a lot of time thinking about what should a slide deck look like. There is no perfect formula, but this is the list I came up with. And I want to take a minute and go through them. The first is the landing slide. The only thing that should be on your landing slide is the name of your company, logo if you have one, your name and your title, maybe the date. That's it. That's the opening point for your slide deck. And you want to be really clear about what you're going to say on that landing slide. who you introduce yourself. Please don't talk about your background unless it relates to telling the story from the beginning. You'll come back to that later in the deck, but either set it up with a story or an example and get ready to launch into that, which brings us to the most important slide in your deck, number 2. I used to call it number 1. It's actually number 2 because the landing slide is number 1. What is the global problem you are solving? If you spend any time on a slide deck, 90% of it should be on this slide, because it's so challenging to figure out how to convey this in a single slide, but it is so important, because if you don't hook them between 2 and 3, you've lost them. They're going to be on their phone, they're going to be checking email. So give a lot of thought to how you want to present this. We can spend some more time talking about this in the Q&A. It is very difficult to frame it in just the right way. It takes a lot of practice and iterations, but please spend the time on helping people understand why this is compelling and important. And by the way, there's a lot of discussion about competitive slides. I never put a competitive slide in my deck. Other people will disagree with me. They'll have the check boxes and the X's. I never put that in my deck. And the reason I don't is that if you haven't clearly framed your competitive advantage from the very first slide, on every slide all the way through, I don't think you've really put together the perfect deck. So that's just my opinion on it. I've never been a fan of graphs and charts on slide decks, because you don't want them reading that. You want them paying attention to what you're saying. So just something to think about from the very beginning. You need to frame your competitive advantage. And then third is your solution to that global problem. This is not your product slide. First you have the problem, then you have the solution, and then you're going to say, hey, let me tell you how I do it. This is how we do it. That's number 4, development of your product. How far along are you? Is there a dashboard? Do you have a prototype? You want to give the specifics about the development of your product. Next is the market and why that's important. It's kind of becoming routine to talk about the market. If you haven't come up with an idea that addresses a large market, then probably it's not a great idea. But the truth is they still want to see it. And as part of the market slide, they want to see an understanding that either there's a validation of your concept, or you've worked with an agency some of the agencies who can sort of be a stamp of validation. It might be a partnership. It might be a potentially large customer. You want to make sure that somewhere in the market slide, you're not just saying this is a $20 billion market, but you're also putting some stamps of approval in there. And then, of course, the partners. In some cases, you have to have a partner at the table to ultimately deliver your solution. So you want to make sure that, especially if they're prestigious, that you've included them and how they participate in the delivery of that solution. And then number 7 is the business plan. How are you going to sell this? Is it going to be channel? Is it going to be direct? Do you have any customers signed up? Anything you can do to be specific about any customers that either you've already closed or you're in discussions with, or if you're not there yet, who you're going to go after. They want to know that you understand how to take your idea out to the market. And I will tell you, beyond creating this idea and product, this is the biggest challenge. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to an early stage company who, they're ready. They've come up with something great and they know it's good. But now that same skill set that got them to this point of creating a great idea and product is a different skill set than what they need to sell it. And so investors, I promise you, will be very skeptical about your ability to go from idea to market. So anything you can do to create credibility on this slide is incredibly helpful. And then, of course, the obligatory team slide. This is where you talk about yourself and you brag on the incredible experience on your team. Now, in some cases, it might just be 1 or 2 people. It might be just you. Feel free to add advisors or other people who are actively engaged and invested in the success of the company. You want to clearly define them, but you can also add them. And then number 9, revenue projections. We know what this looks like, right? Does anyone think this doesn't look like a hockey stick? It always does. What I want to say about the revenue projections is this. You have to have it. Okay, fair enough. Please, I beg of you, please do not say, we're going to do 20 million next year and 150 million the year after that. You might do that. Instead, what they want to hear is, these are our assumptions. And based on these assumptions, this is what we can do. The most important thing you can convey in number 9 is that you understand the assumptions that have to go into achieving the revenue projections that you're going to put out there. So you can build a great spreadsheet and you can put together, the obvious hockey stick of increasing revenue. But where you're going to sound more credible is if you can really talk about the assumptions that went into those projections instead of the actual projections themselves. And then number 10, use of funds. If you're raising $2 million, what are you going to do with it? And I would give some thought to this slide. It's very easy to say, oh, we're going to do marketing, we're going to do sales. They want to see that you really have given considerable thought to how you're going to use the money. And they want to know that you're going to think of it as if it's your own money, that you value their investment the same way you would if you were writing the check yourself. So be specific about that. I recently was in a presentation with a company and, they had a hard time answering that question. And that was the end of the conversation. What the investor heard really it was like the whole presentation up until then hadn't happened. And it's a great company with a great idea. But there hadn't been enough thought given to the answer to that question. And then finally, thank you. You always need an ending slide with your logo, with your maybe a sentence at the most that you want to leave them with. But at the end, you want to make sure that they understand that there's a stopping point. And please end strong. If you're in a business plan competition or even sitting around a conference table or on Zoom, you want to take a moment, take a breath and say, thank you for your time today. It was an honor. It was a pleasure to be here, and create an ending point, because then that will transition into a conversation if there's Q&A, or it's a strong stop that says, I understand, I've stepped into this role and now I've done it and I'm done. Thank you for your time. And it's just a way to end strong. It's just a thought. And then ultimately, of course, you want room for an extra slide. I promise you're going to want more than 12. So a few key takeaways. If you want to share, what's the problem? Why is this a big opportunity? Why should they be interested at all? They want you to have told them why they should make an investment in your company. And the more you can understand where they invest and how they invest in that conversation, the more meaningful it will be, and it will increase your credibility. That's it. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here, and I will be delighted to answer any questions for you.
I put him in our backyard. I opened our screen so he can't call at it.
Thank you, Laura. If anybody has any questions, you are now welcome to unmute yourself, turn your camera on, and ask your question that way. I feel like I have to say you're free to move about the cabin.
The camera.
Right. So please fire away. I believe you have capability of unmuting yourself since this is a meeting. And if not, just put a message in the chat. Now we'll do that.
So you guys, I love questions. So feel free to ask anything. I will be happy to answer anything that would be helpful.
Neil is asking if you could review slide 2 again.
Yeah.
Angel investors?
Well, no, it was the one about the competitive advantage. And I didn't quite follow it. I thought it was a great slide to focus on, but I wasn't sure if you thought it was a good idea to show your competitive advantage or not show it. I got a little mixed up on that one. It was where you had the 12 slides.
Yep.
Yeah, number 2 global problem you are solving should frame competitive advantage. So I wasn't sure, I was sort of getting a little mixed signals on that particular slide.
That's a great question. I'm glad that you asked about that. It's very typical in a slide deck to see a graph that has all the competitors and check boxes or X boxes. Do they have these, attributes or not? And that's how competitive advantage slides have always been done in the past. I'm not a big fan of that. I think if you have to have checks and X's on your slide, you haven't effectively told your story. So then the question becomes, how do I explain my competitive advantage without a competitive advantage slide? Well, that's what I want to talk about. This is my approach, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong or that you should do it this way or not do it this way, but I will tell you that I never have a competitive advantage slide. I think from slide 2 you are framing your competitive advantage. So when you talk about the global problem, you've already teed it up. You've teed up why you are different, why you are unique, and why what you have to offer is competitively better than anything else in the market. And then slide 3 is the solution, which is again global instead of your product, which is 4. And when you start to talk about your solution, they should be clear by the end of that slide that what you're providing in the way of a solution is more effective than anything else in the marketplace. It should be a foregone conclusion.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that helps a little bit. So 2 is the problem, 3 is the solution, and I think 2 and 3 is basically the problem and the solution. 2 and 3.
Yep. That's
Okay.
right.
Okay, that helps.
Now, sometimes you need an extra slide in there. So, this is a time where you might put in an extra slide to talk about your solution or maybe to frame the problem. There's a tendency at the beginning of the slides to talk right away about what you have to offer. But I don't think you've really set up the conversation if you do that. Instead, it's important to understand globally what the problem is. So think big picture.
Yeah, Laura, is it sort of 2 and 3? Is it sort of like find a need and fill it? And number 2 is the need, and 3 is how you're going to fill it?
2 is what's the problem? That's the need, right?
Yes.
There's an issue. I'm trying to think of the specifics about a deck that I went through. It was an ed tech company, and they immediately jumped into why ed tech wasn't working. I'm like, well, there's a bigger problem than why ed tech isn't working. The bigger problem is learning overall, right? It's not about why ed tech isn't working. It's why learning isn't working. So that's what I mean by a global problem. And then you talk about how you address the learning disparity within the school system. And then you can move into how your product addresses that problem.
Okay, that helps. Yeah, that helps.
Good. Okay, awesome. I'll give you another example just because we have a moment. I ran a technology company that had RFID, radio frequency identification. This is an industry that had been around for a long time. These products were in the market. It wasn't a growing area. So the issue was that it was too expensive. RFID is like a tiny little tag that you attach to items to track them throughout the supply chain. My opening slide was just the picture of a warehouse that had hundreds of millions of items in it. And imagine if you could inventory that entire warehouse in a couple of minutes. Well, you could if there was a tiny chip attached to every item in that warehouse. That's a global approach to a problem. It's saying, hey, we have a problem with inventory and supply chain management. Then I went into how we solved that problem. Historically, that problem couldn't be solved because it was too expensive. The battery was too expensive. The chips were too big. Well, if you could solve that problem, you might have a solution. All right, now let me tell you the product that we developed to address that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so going back to number 1, the landing slide, just reiterate again what you think should be best on the landing slide. The first one, that's really not the super pitch, it's number 2. But what's another, reiterate again, what's another good landing slide to use to get the audience's attention immediately?
Yeah, next time I do this presentation, I'm going to do 12 slides and sort of go through each of the slides and what would be helpful on them. But a landing slide is really like where you're hanging out. When someone else pulls up your presentation in a business plan competition, there needs to be a starting point. And when you step onto the stage, when that happens again sometime in the future, there needs to be something up on the giant screen, right? Think of it that way. What is everyone looking at while you're getting ready to deliver your presentation?
Okay.
It should have your company name on it, your logo if you have one, your name, and your title, and maybe the date. A lot of white space.
Oh, so it should be something of a narrative, not a narrative, but a sort of a summary narrative, rather than a picture or a logo or a image.
It should only be an image of your logo and your name and your title. And maybe the date.
Okay, I got it. Okay, got it. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like the cover of the book.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good example. Okay, perfect.
Great.
Laura, we have a next question. A question for Laura. What does given ownership of your company really mean? Example, given 5% away, 50% away when you are starting from scratch. What specifics should you go into when discussing equity in a pitch?
Well, you shouldn't discuss equity in a pitch. That was more background information for, you know, the audience that you're pitching to. So when you start a company, you have to, from the very beginning, create a cap table. A cap table is basically an Excel spreadsheet that lists all the people who have ownership of the company and the percentage of ownership, as well as how that equates to number of shares. When an investor comes into your company, that's when you have to formalize that process. You absolutely must formalize that process because they're going to take a certain percentage of the company. So let's just say it's 20%. And you know, that's what you've agreed with them. You have to be on that cap table as the founder so that there's no cost for your shares. You were there from the beginning. So, you know, there was no value in the company, which means that somewhere down the road, if that company is sold, you're not going to have to pay for that equity that you have, that stock that you have in the company. But once an investor comes in, they're basically setting the valuation for the company. So, you know, depending on how much money they invest, that's going to set a valuation. So there's what's called pre-money and post-money. If your pre-money is $5 million, that means that when you started that conversation with that investor, your company was worth $5 million. Post-money is what it's worth after they invest. So if they invest $5 million, you now have a post-money of $10 million. And you have to represent that in a spreadsheet. So it's clear who owns what amount of equity and what the value is of that stock. As soon as you take money from someone on the outside, your company has more value. And so there's a tax implication attached to that. So you want to think about the cap table. And if you're, you know, getting to that point where you're really seriously looking at venture investment, spend some time understanding cap tables and how to set them up and what they look like. When it's just you and your idea, you own it all. Or you might have business partners. Make sure you document that. Really important to document that. I can't tell you how many companies I've seen just disappear because the founders didn't document ownership percentage-wise based on contribution. But once you've documented that, you know, your company doesn't have value until someone else assigns value to it. And the truth is that value is more an art than a science in the early days. Unless you have a lot of revenue, it's usually based on how much they believe there is potential in your idea. So once that money comes from them, they are now saying your company is this valuable. And you can either accept their value and their money, or you can choose not to. But it's important to document that every step along the way. And that investment from any institutional investor, I promise you, is guaranteed to have preferential rights. That's called preferred stock. They are going to want to have rights over your company, even if they are not majority stockholders, that are probably going to be a surprise for you. It's going to be, you know, you're going to be like, wow, I started this company, I built it. Why do you get to make decisions about future investment? They're trying to protect themselves because they're business people. They've been doing this for a long time and they know what works for them and what doesn't. And they want to make sure that if they don't agree with a decision within the company, that they have some right to protect themselves. So assume that whether they take 5% or they take 51%, they're going to have some preferred rights with that investment. Is that helpful? And can I go deep? Do I need to go deeper? Would it be helpful to share any more in detail about that process?
Well, let's see. Do we have any other questions before we decide to go deep on this one?
Yeah, I had a question.
Sure.
Business plans. So for the business plan part, if we have like an app-based company, would that be like more like marketing oriented, like how we would market that app?
I'm not following what your question is about the business plan.
So for like a business plan side, would it be like, because I'm trying to understand like the differentiation between like the solution side and like the business side. So for the business side, for like an app, would it be like how we would like market the app to people?
Well, is the app still your product at the end of the day? Are you developing an app that people are going to pay for and you're going to make money off of?
Yeah.
Then you still need a business plan, right? Do you want investment money?
Yeah.
Venture money, angel money?
Yeah.
Laura, I think that he's probably referring to like your slide so you're saying slide number 7, business plan. How will you sell your product direct channel? Did I understand your question correctly?
Yeah.
Oh, so the business plan slide?
Yeah.
Got it. So that's direct. You're selling direct to to the consumer. That's a B2C play. There's B2B, B2C. In that case, I'm assuming it's B2C because you're selling directly to a consumer. That means it's a direct business model. Channel is when, you're Microsoft and you go to a computer manufacturer and say, hey, we want you to load our operating system on every product you sell, right? That's a channel. And both, neither one is better or worse than the other. It really depends on the product and the best way to get it to the end user. But in your case with an app, that would be B2C, business to consumer.
And so what would you expect? So if he were pitching you, what would you expect to see on his business plan slide? Like what kind of information would you expect to see there?
I would want you to understand whether or not your consumer purchaser was willing to pay for this app or whether you were going to make revenue in a different way. So somehow it has to make money, right? So some apps you pay for, some are free, and there's advertising on the app. So they want to know how you're going to make money. At the end of the day, that's most important to them. How will you make money off of this idea or this product?
That makes sense. So also for the team side, that comes right after that. So is it important to like emphasize like organizational structure as well going in?
I mean, sure, everyone has to have a role. What's most important is credibility. Definitely you don't want an org chart on there. Instead, you want a picture and a couple bullet points. And if you have some logos, that's good too. So if you worked at a certain company that lends to your credibility for building this product, that's extremely valuable. Mostly they want to know that you're the right team to get this done.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, less is more on that slide. I mean, you want to, if you have 6 people and they're all really amazing and they're all contributing and they're working together to make this happen, get all 6 of them on there. If you don't have 6, you might want to find some advisors or mentors that you can use to sort of, amp it up a little bit. You want to look like you know how to execute. You want to come across as, we know what we're doing because we have the experience and we're the team to make this happen. Or we're the team to make this happen, but we know we're going to need some additional folks and this is who we're hiring, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes they're part-time in the beginning and they become full-time. Just be clear about the role and what they're doing. But the most important thing in there is to be credible.
Yeah.
I have a question. Thank you so much for the presentation. I wanted to explore something you mentioned earlier. What if a business doesn't have a clear path to profitability? And you mentioned turning early advisors into angel investors. Could you elaborate a little bit more on how do you attract the right advisors and how does that transformation in terms of them becoming your biggest advocate for early funding if you don't have a clear path to profitability?
Well, I don't think having a clear path to profitability is always absolutely essential. Now, it's more important today than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. It used to be that 2 guys in a garage could come up with a great idea and, venture capitalists were willing to invest. Unfortunately, that model is broken. I'm hoping we'll get back to that. But today they want to see a path to profitability pretty clearly. So even if you don't have profit right now, they want to know that there's a path to profitability. For the advisor piece, I just can't emphasize enough how important this is. I mean, I act as an advisor to a couple of companies. It's really important to have a good fit with that person, to enjoy working with that person. I never say no when someone asks me to meet with them and understand what they're doing or review their business plan. I should stop saying that, but I can't say no because I love it. I mean, I love working with entrepreneurs and I love the creation of new ideas and new businesses. So for me, that's where my love is. And you want to find someone else who feels that way. And you also want to make sure they're excited about what you're doing. So for example, when I was building an RFID company, I had been out at Stanford for the executive program. And one of the preeminent people in supply chain management happened to be at Stanford as a professor. His name was Hal Lee. And I called him and I said, Hal, I really could use your experience here. Now, Hal, in that case, he was very prestigious. That's why I wanted him involved, but I also really enjoyed my interaction with him. So I asked him to become an advisor to my company because he was credibility, but also he understood our market. I had another advisor who didn't understand our market, but he was extremely engaged in the day-to-day operations, and I could go to him when I had questions, kind of like a coach without actually being a coach, someone with experience who could, lend to the decision-making process. So it depends on what you're looking for, but there's a lot of talent out there. The brain trust is incredible, and folks like to get involved. Just understand that you're probably going to have to give them some equity in your company in exchange for their time. Some like to get paid. That's hard to do in an early stage company, but at the very least, they're going to want equity in exchange for their commitment.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
I had a question. So my question was pertaining to like, how do you show competitive advantage for like an app-based startup? Because like I remember you mentioned that like we shouldn't have any like tick boxes in charts, but I was thinking like for a smartphone app that would actually be like really clear, like visually to kind of show like where your strengths are and like how you have a different market from others and things like that.
Well, apps are big now, and apps can be really great investment opportunities. But the truth is, unless it's a big opportunity, it's probably not going to attract outside investment. So there are a lot of different kinds of apps out there now, and some of them will attract investment and some will not. They're also not that expensive to build, so sometimes you don't even need outside investors for that. But as far as the framing the competitive advantage, if you have to get to the slide where you're, checking off what you have and they don't have, I think you've lost them at that point. Your app has to be unique and for outside investment only. Look, you can do anything on your own dime and your own budget if you can bootstrap it. But if you want outside investors, they want to know that yours is so much more interesting than anything on the market that it's not difficult to explain what your competitive advantage is. So, they feel pretty strongly about that, and that's where they invest. Now, it doesn't mean they won't like your idea. I took an app idea to a venture investor who was a friend of mine. Great name for the company, really good, great idea. And, they quickly said, hey, this is cool, but, Google was going to be able to do this in about a minute. So if you can't explain how it's unique enough and has staying power enough, then they probably will take a pass on it. But when I say that, also know, look, a venture investor once said to me, if it's a good idea today, it'll be a good idea tomorrow. So I really appreciated that advice because he's right. If it has to be done immediately, it's probably doesn't have staying power. And secondly, if you came up with this idea, 10 other people probably did too. It's really about whether you can sell it, bring the right people to the table to execute, and ultimately get it out to the market. So, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for, a robust opportunity.
Got it. Yep. Thank you.
Of course.
Hi, Laura. Just had a question for you about, thank you for your time, by the way. Should have started with that. But have you seen any kind of outlandish presentations that grabbed you in a different way? Or I don't know, they did a skit or they had something that just was unique that really grabbed you?
It better be really freaking good. No. I have seen gimmicky approaches. Like I'll take you back to a venture pitch competition I was in a while ago. The same coach was coaching each of the companies. So she was hired by multiple companies at this same venture conference. And so I think she was running out of ideas, truthfully. And one of the companies said every time they changed and they wanted to place emphasis on their point, they changed through slides or through an idea. They wanted to, have some punch there. And the presenter said, newsflash. And so that became her way of grabbing the attention of the audience. And it just didn't work. It fell flat. It was like, all I can tell you about that presentation is newsflash. I can't tell you the name of the presenter. I can't tell you what her product was. I can't tell you what her company did. All I remember is newsflash. The goal in this presentation is for them to think you have a great idea, that you know how to do this, and that you're the right person to invest in. That's what's most important. Now, when I say that though, understand that you got to stand out too. And I've worked with many presenters and entrepreneurs who, they kind of, it's scary. This is kind of scary. This is not easy stuff to do. I mean, let's be honest, it's intimidating. We all get nervous. Everyone gets nervous. And they tend to read their slides and they sound very monotone. That's death for a presentation. You have to have some inflection. You have to have transitions between thoughts, and for sure, put a lot of effort into transition between slides. So I'll give you a quick example. Slide 2 is, what's the global problem you're solving? Slide 2 is, here's my solution to that problem. Slide 3 is product. The way you move between slide 3 and slide 4 is, so let me tell you how we do it. It's got to be conversational. So it's really important to keep it in a conversational tone so that it sounds very genuine, as opposed to writing out long sentences. Make sure your sentences are short, they're clear, they're crisp, they have an ending, and they have some punch. So, I just finished writing a draft of a book. I love to write for business. I can do that all day long. Writing a book, very different writing style. It's got to be what's in my head has to come on the page, and you have to read it like you would think it, instead of business, which is thoughtful, organized, and methodical. That's the same thing for a slide deck. It's got to be what's in your head. It's got to feel like a conversation. You have to grab their attention and, help them relate to you. So, you do need a little bit of that, but I'm not a huge fan of going outside the general framework, because you want them to remember you, not a skit.
Okay, so you haven't really seen anything that worked like that?
No.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
I have seen clips, like a news clip or a testimonial. You can put those kinds of things in there, but I've never seen a skit or anything that was sort of like a gimmick that worked. But you never know. I mean, it's possible.
Got it. Thank you.
What about for like endings? Is there like a creative way to like end that goes beyond thank you, or like leaves like a good impression?
What's the most important thing you want them to remember when you close down that deck?
Probably like our solution.
Whatever you want them to remember, the very last thing you want them to see is what you want on that last slide.
Okay.
So some people believe that you should be more creative there, and that, maybe you should talk about the market or something like that. I personally want them to remember my company. I want them to be like, wow, that was a killer presentation. And what was the name of that company? And I want to see that. For me, that works, but everyone has their own approach to it. You can be more creative there, but just make sure that it's whatever you want them to leave the presentation with, because they see a lot of deals. So, look, for a venture capital firm, they might get 1,000 business plans, maybe meet with 10 companies and invest in one. So you have to bear that in mind when you're thinking about the funnel and how many deals go through any venture firm in a given day, month, or year. And the goal is to stand out in a way that's really meaningful, where they remember you.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Hi, Laura. This is Josh Cable from Inventwood.
Oh my golly, Josh, how are you?
Good, good.
Great idea.
I apologize, by the way. I think we were supposed to connect about 6 months ago, but since my son was born, I've been trying to get my life back. So first of all, my first question was, can we connect at some point? But I think you already answered that when you said you can't say no. But my second question was more about the pitch process itself, and I guess the funding amount. So maybe a couple of sub questions. The first is, we're in the process of fundraising for a seed round. We're about to enter a seed round, and we've been given different guidance on how much we should ask for. And our current amount is 2 million, but I just wanted to ask from a general standpoint, in a seed round, how much is generally looked favorably upon, and how much is asking for too much?
Well, a seed round is usually not $2 million. It's in the hundreds of thousands. But I think it's important for everyone who's on this call today to know that you have personally invested in this because you really believe in it and you've put it all on the line. So, you're a founder and an entrepreneur who, believes so much in what you're doing that you put everything you have into it. And so there's no question that an investor is going to look favorably on that and say, this guy's staring at the ceiling at night trying to figure out how to make this successful. And they want that. They want you to feel that. But as far as, you know, the question about seed versus, I mean, I think you're headed toward a Series A there.
Okay.
But there's a general rule of thumb on fundraising. And, you know, this is not hard and fast, it's just general. And that is that you raise as much as you can. It's always better to raise money when you don't need money, and it's better to raise more rather than less. So if you have more available to you, I think it's always a good idea, because everything costs twice as much and will take twice as long as what you think it will be. And I promise you, any investor who is sitting on the other side of your slide deck is going to be thinking that. It'll cost twice as much as you say it will, and it'll take twice as long. So even if they've bought in and they're excited about it, they're still going to be thinking that.
Got it. Great. No, that's helpful. And then my second question was, you know, there's a lot of red flags that investors look for in entrepreneurs and startup companies, but what are some red flags that entrepreneurs should look for in investors that would
I was going
suggest?
to say, is there a list? I don't know if there's a list, but wow, that's a good question. I think the most, bear in mind, by the way, I've had good investor experiences and I've had bad ones. Even in the situations where they weren't great, I still respect where they're coming from, which is that they want to make money. So if you go into that conversation understanding that is their goal, and if you're okay with that goal, then, you know, you can usually find some common ground. That said, they're not all great to work with. So number one, ask to speak to other portfolio companies. Best advice you'll ever get will be from other portfolio companies. If there's an accelerator in Maryland called Data Tribe. If you called any of the Data Tribe companies, they only invest in cyber. You're going to get pretty consistent feedback about working in that accelerator from all of those portfolio companies. And I think that's helpful. I mean, they're going to be honest with you and say, these are the things, you know, you should know going into a negotiation. Some things are negotiable, some things are not. So definitely talk to other companies who have taken money from that investor. The second thing is, look, you know, if you like working with someone, sometimes you don't have a choice. You might have to take the money even if you don't love working with that person, but you know if it's a good fit for you. I mean, you know who you like working with and where it feels like, you know, you guys have mutual respect. The truth is it's a difficult relationship sometimes because you might not have the same goals. You know, I was on a call yesterday with an AI company and he really wants to raise venture money. And the truth is, I know immediately that any venture firm that looks at his deal is going to be like, wow, really cool technology. No, we don't agree on the strategy and the rollout. So, you know, he's going into that conversation in kind of a tough spot, but he still wants venture money. So at the end of the day, I had to say, look, I don't think you're ready for venture money because, you know, this is the way it's going to go down. So, you know, you want to find someone who you enjoy working with. I think it's important to have a good partnership, but understand at the end of the day, their motivation is to make money and you have to be okay with that.
Great. Thank you, Laura.
Any other questions?
Great questions, Josh. Any other questions? I have a question, Laura.
No, now I'm worried.
Following up on the last question from Josh, without going into too many like actual details, can you give us example of where it can go wrong? Like what does it mean a bad investor experience?
Well, I have put out there publicly on my LinkedIn page. I had an investor who invested with milestones in the deal. It's not unusual to have milestones. That means that you have to like meet certain requirements along the way before they fully fund your company. So in that case, it was a $2 million investment. It was broken down into 3 tranches. Each of the tranches was funded because we met each of the 3 goals. And then the investor came back and said, you know what, we don't think you met one of those milestones. And so that's kind of a tough conversation to have because I was looking at the document, he was interpreting it one way and I was interpreting it another. That's a tough conversation to have. So the more clear you can be about the terms, the 2 most important things I learned at Stanford to focus on are documentation and accounting. Make sure you document your deal well and make sure you're keeping good records from the beginning. Those 2 things will keep you out of trouble. So, you know, there's often a misalignment of what you think you've agreed to or the direction of the company, that can be very difficult. But most things with most investors, I find they're generally pretty open to talking and working through.
And one of the questions, could you spend a few minutes talking about what kind of things investors look for to see in use of funds, and what kind of things would they say, no, just don't put that there. I'm not going to fund that.
Well, in the example that I was sharing earlier, this company has a great idea, but what is difficult for potential investors is that their great idea is built on someone else's platform. And so, in that case, they were saying, well, we're going to build our own platform. The investor didn't want to hear that. They want to know that the money is going toward rolling this product out into the marketplace. So you just need to be aware of what they're looking for in that conversation. A lot of times in early stage companies, there are decisions are made that investors might not necessarily agree with. So for example, in one of the companies that I ran, the founders had spent money on car leases and perks that really weren't a good use of funds. So I think it's important to understand that what they're looking for is for you to build a great product and sell it. So they want to know that you're going to hire the right people on your team. You're going to invest in the right processes for building that product and getting it out to the market. Ultimately, that's what they're looking for.
All right, thank you so much. Looks like we are at time. As I mentioned, we recorded this presentation. We will post it on YouTube later this week, so you can watch this again. And I will send Laura's slides as well to you.
Thank you all for joining. Let me know if I can be helpful. You have a great resource there at University of Maryland, though.
Yep, thank you. Thank you so much, Laura. And thank you to everybody who joined, and thank you for asking great questions.
Good luck to you guys. I wish you all well.
Thank you.